The presidential contender from USA on a libertarian ticket. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so yesterday I changed hats. I know you guys like this one. Yesterday I went and I bought some water. I was talking a lot about taxes, and I got the receipt from the water. So I want to point something out. In the U.S., in general, what they like to do is, because the government's there to protect us and take care of us and protect our rights and all these other things. In general, even though a lot of politicians would like to tax everything, including the air and the water and everything else, they don't tax things like food and water and things that are considered necessities, things that are considered human rights, because why would you tax that? They try to just tax things that are privileges like roads, electricity, some of these other things that they consider to be luxuries. So when I went to buy a bottle of water at a store over here, I noticed there's an 18% tax. It's a VAT tax on water. They're taxing your water 18%. I don't know if that's just certain stores or just certain bottled water, or if that's considered a luxury, or if the government of Uganda thinks that it's appropriate to tax something that's really a human right, something you need to survive. So I talked yesterday about inflation, and I'm going to get to foreign aid in a minute, but a lot of this is really all related. So this is 1,000 shillings, and there's a little like reflective stripe down the side. Has everybody seen that? Probably. Do you know what it's there for? Anybody? Why do they put that there? Because it makes it harder to copy, to counterfeit. Because the government, who likes to keep monopolies, they like to be the only ones who can counterfeit. Remember, I was talking about inflation. That's basically counterfeiting. They're creating these certificates that represent the money that they keep in their vault, and they just print more. I was looking at the history of the Uganda shilling, and right now the biggest bill that you have, I think, is 500,000, or is it 50,000? 50,000? 100,000? 50? So, and these are relatively new, right? 5 or 10 years ago, they didn't have those bills. The highest was maybe 200. And a few years before that, the highest was 100. And the reason the numbers keep going up is because the government needs more money and they can't tax it, so they start printing it. So they create these little features in here to make sure that they're the only people who are allowed to counterfeit money. Here's another interesting feature that not many people know, even in the US, but even all over the world. I'm going to pass some of these around. This coin right here is 500 shillings. It's a little coin, and when I pass it around, you're going to see there's these little ridges on the side. Does anybody know why those are there? Pass that around. This one is 50 cents of euros. This one is 1,000 shillings, and you can see it's got an interesting design. There's kind of like 3 layers, and it has these little ridges on the side and some words written to the side. Does anybody want to take a guess what those are? That's just like the little stripe on the bill. It's a security feature. It's to prevent counterfeiting. What people have done in the past, when coins were more valuable, coins now they're the same as the paper. The metal that they're made out of is almost worthless. But coins used to be made out of metal that was actually worth something. Here's one that's made out of copper. Copper's actually pretty valuable. That one doesn't have any ridges on the end of it. Here's another 20-cent euro. That one doesn't have the ridges all the way around, but it's got some little indentations in it. So what these are is this is a security feature. Because if this is just metal, is this one better? If this is just metal, couldn't you melt this down and it should still be worth the same thing, right? Normally that's what money used to be. The metal itself was the value. What was printed on the front was just so you knew how much metal it was. And so what people would do is they'd actually scrape off the side of these coins to collect the metal. Then they'd still be able to spend that metal as if it was the same full thing. But if you scrape off enough, just a little piece from each coin, and you go through several coins, you end up with a lot of extra metal. You can start making your own coins. This is early counterfeiting. So the Roman Empire actually did this to their own money. So the government likes to print its own money, right? They like to counterfeit and create money out of thin air. They would do this to their own coins, and this is how they funded the army. They'd take the metal off of their own coins, and they'd create more money, because when it's paper, you can just print more money, but when it's metal, where do you get more metal? You have to dig it up, you have to find it, you have to refine it. That's a lot harder to do, but if you can just take the metal off coins that are already going around, you can essentially create money out of thin air. There's, oh, you guys are already passing those around. I was going to say, there's, if you want to come up for these later, there's some cards and some, so Jerome told you I'm unofficially running for president of the United States. I say unofficially because they have a process. And in order to run, you have to sign different contracts that say where you're allowed to take money from. They're controlling the elections. They're limiting who's allowed to run in these elections. They make it very difficult. In fact, if you're not part of the two major parties in the system there, it's very difficult for you to even get on the ballot. So my objection to this is that anybody should be able to get on the ballot, right? Because why shouldn't anybody be able to run? It's supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people, right? Why shouldn't any person be able to get on that ballot? And right now they're limiting it unless you're part of a bigger organization. So on my card, I wrote the words, "We are not government property." Because, here, if you just want to pass them around. And I've got some taxation and theft stickers up here too, if you want to pass those around. We are not government property, because government ultimately usually likes to treat us like we're their property. They tell us how we can live our lives, what we can eat, how do we pay taxes, how much taxes, where we're allowed to travel. They almost treat us like farm animals, it seems like. In some places, a lot of people want health care from the government, but in some places the government forces health care on you. They make you take vaccines. They make you take drugs. They make your kids take drugs or eat certain things. If you feed your kids certain things, they'll take your kids away from you because they don't like the way that you're feeding your kids. And this is all mostly just based on someone's opinion. Somebody comes up with a law and says, well, we don't think these people should be able to do something, or we don't think they should have some freedom, so we're going to treat them like our property. We're going to pass a law and say how they have to behave. And if they don't do it right, we'll do something to get our revenge on them. I want to bring up an interesting point here. How many people think I talk funny? I talk funny? So I think you guys talk funny because we both talk differently, right? So it's the same language. We can understand each other, but it's a little bit different. If you ask me, you have an accent. If I ask you, I have an accent. So which one of us is right? All of us? Okay. Well, I think it's all of me, but does anyone want to take a vote? Should we take a vote? I'm probably going to lose, right? So this is interesting because this is all perspective. A lot of the things, and I want to congratulate you guys on a lot of the things that you've been talking about, what government's about, what it's for, why it's there, what our liberties are, what our rights are. These are all really great things. But at the end of the day, everybody wants something different. So what's actually right? Is there a mathematical scientific equation that we can come up with? We can look outside and we can say the sky is blue. And nobody can say that that's wrong, unless you speak a different language where blue means something else maybe. Somebody might say that's red, and they're not trying to say the sky is red, they're just saying they call that color red. It's all perspective, right? Both sides are right. So a lot of these things we're talking about, what's right and what's wrong is what's the actual answer. Maybe there is no answer. Maybe sometimes it just has to be, we have to agree that there is no right answer, and we have to find a way that all of us can live together peacefully without interrupting each other's lives and violating each other's rights. And if we can't do that, we're in a lot of trouble. When it comes to things like theft, it's easier to see. But when it comes to things like if I take something out of your hand, pretty much everyone would agree that that's theft. But what if somebody were to say, that's my mountain over there? And if I see somebody go onto that mountain, I'm gonna accuse them of stealing that mountain from me, because now they're claiming it's their property, but I claimed it's my property. Who's right? What gives me the right to claim property that's all the way over there? What gives that other person the right to just walk onto it and claim it's theirs? And when we talk a lot about governments, foreign governments and corporations coming in and taking resources from all over Africa, from this country, where are they taking them from? Who are they stealing from? Who owns that property? If you wanted to go build a house on that hill, would you be able to? Or would the government say, you have to buy it from us first? So the government says, well, that's my mountain. If you want to build a house on that mountain, first you have to buy it from me. If you want to pull resources out of that ground, first you have to buy it from me. Did the government have the right to say that that's their land in the first place? What if all those houses on that hill right there decided that they don't want to be a part of the same government that we're a part of? They don't want to go to war with us. They don't want to fight with us over here. But they just don't want to have the same government. They want to have a different government there than we have here. Should that be okay? They want to have different rules governing their city versus the city over here. Should that be okay for them to do that? And why is the government of Uganda going to say, but you can't do that because you're all part of the same country? So we're going to have, you might be able to have different cities and different rules within that city, but ultimately it's all part of Uganda. So whoever is running Uganda, whoever has power and control over Uganda, now has control over what the laws are over here as well as over there. Even though these people, you and them, might see things differently and might want to build your society differently. So these are really important questions, and there might not be a right or a wrong answer, right? Because maybe the people over there say, well, this is our hill, we all own it together. That's more like socialism, but if that's how those people want to live, maybe that's fine. If nobody has a problem with it. Maybe it's not right, maybe it's not wrong. Over here, everybody wants to live a little bit differently. Everybody owns a little piece of land, there's nothing collective. Maybe that's right. At what point does that violate somebody's rights? What if they're over there and they say, we own this hill collectively and everybody here agrees, and that's perfect, that works great for us, but we want to expand our collective, and they want to include everybody here in their group now, and they want to impose their rules over here. Is that right or wrong? What if most of the people here agree with that and they want to take part of that, but you here in this room don't? Is it okay for the majority out there to say, well, we're going to join that hill, we're going to become one part of their whole collective, and you guys here, well, if you don't like it, you have to either get out or just deal with it. Is that right? Is that a violation of your rights? So there's a lot of really interesting scenarios that we can come up with on this, and what's right and what's wrong sometimes is you can't just write it in a small set of rules. You have to consider every scenario in every case. You have to think. We got some music. So consider that hill. I'll wait for that. There's a party, should we go? So if there are a lot of natural resources in that hill over there, and a foreign country or a foreign business comes here and says, we want to extract those resources, who are they extracting them from? Who are they taking it from? Who owns that hill? Who do they have to buy those resources from? If there's nobody, maybe on one of these hills over here, it looks like there's no houses on it. If they want to take from one of those hills, There's nobody on it. That hill doesn't belong to somebody. So there's nobody there to say, well, you have to pay me. So couldn't anybody just come from anywhere and go to that hill and start extracting resources? Are they stealing? The government of Uganda would say, well, that's in our geographic area, which usually you look at countries and how they're formed. Sometimes there's borders with either roads or rivers, natural barriers, mountains, canyons. This is how they build borders for countries, and they say, I'm going to rule everything from here to that river. Sometimes it's just, they just draw a circle on a map and say everything in between here and here. Some people fight over those, they fight over those borders and say, no, I want to go a little bit further, and somebody on the other side says, no, that's under my control. So they fight over it. So when somebody comes and says, I want to extract some resources from that mountain, who do they have to pay? Now, if they go over here where somebody has a house and they say, I want to take something from under your house, they might have to pay the person who owns that house because they can say it's my property, right? So they're taking from the person, but they have to sell it to them. That's their right. That's their property. But if you talk about a hill that has nobody on it, who says they own it? It's probably going to be the government, right? The government of Uganda is going to say, that's my hill. And what they're going to do is they're going to sell those resources to another nation. Are you going to get any of that money? Are they going to share that with you? Maybe. Well, it depends on the government, right? Maybe they might share it with you when it comes around to an election and they're trying to get some votes. Maybe they're going to share it with you so that you can give them more power. Sometimes government gives free things so that you'll say, okay, well, I'll give up some of my rights. I'll let the government have more power. I'll let them build an army because they built a hospital for me. So they trick you into trading these things. And that's really very often been the case where governments, I mean, you look inside of government, what are bribes? Somebody wants something done, they give money to somebody, right? Isn't that really just a bribe? If somebody wants to take part of that mountain, they find the right person who works for the government and say, hey, I'm going to give you some money, give my people access to that mountain so we can take what's in there. Isn't that kind of a bribe? Maybe. Of course, that still comes back to the question of, but whose mountain is it? Who should they have to pay to take what's in that mountain? Another interesting question is, why aren't you taking what's in that mountain? We talk about entrepreneurship. And earlier we were talking about how nations are wealthier compared to each other. There's a lot of resources here. People, what's the most valuable resource any person will ever have? Anybody? Life? Good. Anybody else? Your mind. Your mind is the most powerful resource you'll ever have because your mind creates wealth. Your mind is what goes to that mountain and says, here's some resources, let me turn it into something useful. Because ultimately, what's all this money if there's nothing? If there's just money and that's it. There's no houses, there's no food, there's no water, there's no resources, it's just money. What's it worth? Nothing, right? So it's the resources that you have that make a country valuable, that improves life. How is your life better? Because you have a roof over your head, right? You don't have to sit out in the rain when the rain comes around. All these resources make your life better. And how do you create all these resources? With your mind. They're there in nature. All you have to do is be the vehicle to take those resources and turn them into something. So I know a lot of you are talking about entrepreneurship while we're here. We talked a lot about government, but entrepreneurship is another reason you're here, right? What is entrepreneurship? The word entrepreneur, entre means in between, and I think preneur comes from business. Help me out with that one. What's preneur come from? To take. Okay. I've heard it described as a middleman. An entrepreneur is a middleman. Because what they do is they take a resource, they have a raw resource over here, and they have all these people over here, and all these people don't know what to do with this resource, but they want something else. So one person takes these resources and they figure out how to turn it into something else that these people want, and they give it to them. And for that, for adding the value, because as soon as you take a raw resource out of the ground and change it into something else that's more valuable, you've created value out of nothing. Something that was worth 1,000, any unit of money before, is now worth 10,000 because you changed it, you refined it, you shaped it, you molded it into something useful that somebody else can use. That creates value. And so there are so many resources here. You can take those resources and figure out what to do with them. We're worried about a lot of people coming into this country or coming into Africa and taking resources outside of Africa to sell all over the world, to create other things, to send to factories around the world. Why not create factories here? Why not learn how to refine the materials here? Why not use them to build here and create a better style of living here for yourself? Why not? That's what entrepreneurship is. That's what creates wealth. Instead of selling it and giving it away, take all the resources that you have here and create something with it. So I said I was going to talk about foreign aid. And like I talked about before, everyone likes to give free stuff, right? Because free stuff gets people to like you. If I give everybody free stuff, they're going to like me. Oh, that's that guy that gave us some free stuff. You might vote for me. You might give me power. You might say, oh, well, he wants to pass a bill. I don't know what's in the bill, but I like the guy, so I'm going to support that bill. And that bill might take away your rights. When we look at foreign aid, there's really a lot of that's the same. You have countries that are giving aid to another country, and a lot of times there are strings attached. We have a saying that says, there's free cheese in a mouse trap. You set a trap, you put cheese in it, you get the mouse or a rat to go in there, he sees free cheese. He thinks, hey, this is a great deal. Somebody left some cheese out for me. But as soon as he goes in, the door closes behind him, or something falls down and snaps him in half, and that's the end of the mouse. And this is sometimes how foreign aid works, because people aren't just giving out free money. There are charities that do that, but on the scale that governments and countries around the world give out money to other countries, they're not just being generous. It all comes with strings attached. China right now is building roads all over Africa, right? What are they going to use those roads for? Is that just so you can have roads? Or are they going to use that to extract more resources? Is it free? Is it really free? They're doing it in exchange for something, right? Now, I'm not saying roads are a bad thing, right? Because let's say you built the roads on your own. They might say, well, hey, they built their own roads, so let's still figure out a way to extract the resources. But now, when they come and say that that's what they want, you don't have to say yes, because they didn't give you the roads. You built them yourself. There's kind of an imbalance in the negotiation there, right? If they can say, well, we want to take the resources out of this mountain over here, and you can say, well, no, we don't really think you should do that. They're going to say, but we gave you all those roads. You agreed to it before. We gave you all these roads. Why? Just let us take some. And they'll take a little bit, and then when they need more, they'll say, come on, give us a little bit more. Those roads are very valuable. Look what they're doing for your country. It's all strings attached. So you have to be very careful when you take foreign aid and see what those strings are attached. Now, of course, when the foreign aid comes, how many people in this room get to vote on whether or not to accept foreign aid? Anybody? Show of hands. You get to vote on whether or not to accept foreign aid? They let you vote on that? You vote against it. In the current situation, okay. So they let you vote on it sometimes. Sometimes they don't let you vote. What's that? So sometimes they let you vote and sometimes they don't. What's that? What has? Yes. So what politicians like to do is they like to create bills that give them power. And when a bill passes and a government gets power, sometimes that power is to create new laws without having to vote. So for instance, in the US, a lot of times what they do is they create agencies. There's an agency called the FDA that regulates medicine, drugs, food. They regulate what's okay to eat, what's not okay to eat, what kind of medication you're allowed to take or not take. And this organization was created by passing a law. But what they also did was they passed a law saying this organization can make up as many rules as they want. They can create new, they call them regulations. Laws are what the government are what the Congress passes, and the regulations are what this new organization passes. So now you have representatives who are supposed to be creating laws. Normally you can call them up and say, hey, I don't like this law, but the law's already passed. And 50 years later, the organization that they created with those laws are now making their own regulations, and it's now one step away from your representative. Your representative has no control over that because he doesn't vote for or against those regulations anymore. And so when you look at when people create laws and what they're allowed to do, they're allowed to give themselves more power to create more laws without having to vote on them, to change things arbitrarily. Sometimes they'll set up subcommittees where 5 people will vote on a rule change instead of hundreds of people, and nobody to object to it. There's only 5 people there. And so when a country comes along and says, we're going to offer you a lot of free money, all you have to do is give us some resources. Some people are willing to take that money. Let me give you a little exercise in your head. Think about in your head, you're working for the government. And let's say you're working at immigration to come into the country at the airport. Now, as part of that job, they train you who to let in, who not to let in. Only some people are allowed in, some people aren't allowed in. Now, if one person comes and says, you know, here's my papers, and you look at them and you say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to come in the country because these rules say you can't come in. It's your job. What do? Do you tell them, I'm sorry, you have to go back? Or do you let them in anyway and break the rules? What would you do? You going to let them in, or are you going to send them away? Send them away, because that's your job, right? And if you don't do your job right, somebody might see that, and then they're going to say, well, he's not doing his job, let's fire him. You're worried about that, right? You want to keep your job. You want to keep getting paid. But now, what if that was your brother? What if your brother was he went on a vacation, and now he's trying to come in the country, and your brother says, here's my papers, I know I'm missing something, but what are you going to do? It's your brother. You know him. You're just going to let him in, right? You allow him. That's corruption. Because now you have a certain set of rules and you applied them to people you don't know. But it's personal. You can't. It's family. It's understandable. I'm not gonna say that I wouldn't do the same thing in that situation. But it proves that at any level, any of us are corruptible. Any of us. And the more power you're given, how would you use that power differently? What if you're in the parliament and there's a new law, and that law is going to create a tax that steals money from a lot of people, but it's also going to help your neighborhood specifically where you live. It's going to do something to benefit your neighborhood. Don't you think a lot of people would say, well, there's already taxes, what's one more tax? This is going to help my family and where they live. Don't you think it's easy for a lot of people to do that? Now, what happens if a big country comes and says, hey, I've got billions of dollars. I want to take something from your country. And I'll give you a lot of money. I'll give you $1 million if you can make a bill and get that bill passed that allows me to come in and take those resources. You think there's not somebody who's going to say, well, it's a lot of money. I could help my family with that money. Yeah, let me figure out how to do it. Somebody's going to do it, right? It's corruption. You're laughing, but we're all human. We're all flawed. We're not perfect. A lot of us in that situation, especially, I mean, imagine this. Imagine, I'm sure a lot of people in this room wouldn't take that money from a country, $1 million to pass a law like that, right? But what if somebody in your family was kidnapped and they were asking for ransom and they asked for $1 million, and all of a sudden you have to come up with $1 million to get your brother back, or your father, or your mother? A lot of people would do anything to get their family back, right? They might pass that law too to get that money. because we're all human. So these are really important things to think about when we're giving power to people to be able to create those laws in the first place. What would happen if that government presented $1 million to a person and said, hey, I want you to create this bill and get this bill passed so I can take all those resources. But the person that they asked to pass that bill didn't have the power to pass that bill? What if the entire parliament didn't have the power to pass that bill? Because the Constitution says there's a limit. You cannot pass this bill. This bill does not fit within the Constitution. There's no power to pass that bill. Is the person going to be corrupt and take that money now? They can't. What are they going to do? They'll take the money and they'll fail to deliver. They won't be able to pass the law. Right? They don't have the power. They're taking money to do something they cannot do. So this is a really important reason why we should limit the power that government has. If there's no power to abuse, they can't be abused. This is a loud street. So, okay, let me ask this question. How many of you are free? Really free? Why not? You're not free? You're free? Are you free? You're free? Are you free? Is everybody in this room free? No? I see some yeses and I see some nos. Why not? What's stopping you from being free? You're limited by the rules? Okay. Anyone in particular? Is there a specific rule that, is there something specific you can't do because there's a rule?
Like accessing some documents.
Like accessing some
Documents concerning the government. You are not allowed.
So you don't have access to certain things because of rules, so you're not free in that way. You should have access to that. So this is an interesting question. We talked yesterday about the Declaration of Independence. This was not people trying to figure out how to participate in government and say, hey, government, give us rights, give us freedom, please, please give us freedom. That didn't work. They tried that. It didn't work. They had to declare it. Declaration of Independence. They said, we are free. We are not you. We are not your property. We are not government property. We're free. We're asserting that right. We're not free because you gave us freedom. We're free because we demanded it, because we're human beings. We have rights. We're conscious. We have minds. We understand what the world is. So if I ask you if you are free, shouldn't you just be able to say, yes, I am free? Aren't you free? Can't you do anything you want? I mean, there are always consequences to your actions, right? I mean, you're free to go out and slap a lion in the face, right? It's probably not a good idea. There's going to be consequences to that. Well, government is there too. You're free. The government says there's a law against something, and you want to do it anyway. You're free to do it. There are going to be consequences. Government's going to say, well, I saw that you did something because you're free and you did it, but we don't like it. So we're going to arrest you. We're going to stick you in a cage. We might take some of your property, charge you a fine. So you're free. You're really free. Can you say that? Say, I am free. Say it. I am free. Say it again. Doesn't that feel good to say that? Now you know government's out there, and government's always going to be, there's always going to be people out there. Even if there's no government at all. We saw in this room today, some people said things and people didn't agree with it. That's fine. We can disagree, but we didn't fight, right? Nobody said, I don't like what you said, I'm going to stick you in a cage. But governments have always done that. Whenever you say, well, government shouldn't have so much power, governments usually come around and say, I don't like what this guy's saying. If other people start thinking like this, we might lose our power, so we need to put this guy in a cage. But he's still free to say it, right? No matter how many laws they make, they cannot stop you from thinking. They can't stop your brain from working unless they kill you. They can't stop you from saying you are free. They can't stop you from acting free. All they can do is respond in any way they're going to respond. So you can challenge government and you can say, it's not right for you to stick me in a cage because of what I did. But what happens when they have an entire nation of people behind them? What happens if you find yourself in a court and they're trying to say, we need to stick this person in a prison for the rest of their life because of something that they said? And they bring in people from that hill over there and they say, hey, what do you think? Should we stick this guy in prison? And the people on that hill, they didn't like what you said either. So they say, well, yeah, stick him in prison. Is that right? To stick someone in prison for saying something? Not even doing anything, just saying something. But government always does that, right? Not always, but we see that a lot. So this is another reason why we have to be careful whenever we give power to the government, because that power always gets abused. So something else I want to talk about, we did have some disagreements in here before, and people got emotionally involved, and that's okay. We're human. We get emotionally involved. But this is something that's really important to understand, especially some of you are interested in getting into politics. Most people don't think logically and rationally. They don't. In fact, there was even a study done where they found participants who had the part of their brain that controls their emotions. That part of their brain was damaged. They had no emotions. And they asked them to make simple decisions. What do you prefer? Vanilla or chocolate? What do you prefer? And they couldn't make a decision because they had no emotion. A lot of decisions that we make are based on emotion, even if we think they're not. So, for example, somebody comes up with a new bill and it's going to do something. It might take away some of your rights. Now you can say, well, if I think logically and rationally, it's wrong to take away people's rights, so I'm going to make sure that that bill doesn't pass. Are you thinking logically and rationally? Does anybody think that's a logical and rational thought? Why you would vote against that bill? Anyone? Actually, you have an emotional attachment to freedom. And when you see that bill, you can speak logically about it all you want. You can think. But what scientists have found is when you have an opportunity to make a decision, your decisions are usually made. Oh, battery's dying. The decisions are usually made with your emotions. And all these logical arguments you come up with, typically, you come up with afterwards to support that argument. Because the reality is there are always logical arguments to support for or against the bill. Always. They might not be good arguments. They might be, oh, but it's for national security. We hear this one a lot in the United States. The argument against the bill might be we're going to lose our rights, but the argument for the bill is going to be, but it's for national security. If we don't pass it, terrorists are going to come in and everyone's going to die. That's what they tell us. There's pros and cons for both sides of the argument. But the people who usually argue against those bills, they'll come up with all those rational arguments, but the main argument that they have is that they want to protect freedom because they're emotionally connected with freedom. Now, you can use these logical and rational thoughts to change people's minds, but what's really important to understand, and especially people in this room, you're able to understand these thoughts and you're able to take your emotional attachments to certain positions. Maybe you favor one type of government or another. It takes a lot of rational thought to understand, no, actually, I think I do like this other type of government better. It takes a lot. But to a lot of people out there, they're not critical thinkers like you. They think more emotionally. And this is why we see a lot of elections being corrupted by people saying things that really make no sense in the point of the election. Like Trump. He said Mexicans are rapists and terrorists, or some of them are rapists and terrorists. That really doesn't make any difference to most of what the campaign is. But it got people emotionally involved because most of those people, they're not critical thinkers like you. So they think, they hear this thing, they hear one thing and they're like, yeah, Mexicans are bad. And then they start building on this emotion. And his entire campaign was just building on these emotions to get people to be afraid of one thing or to fear something else. Because when people are afraid, you're able to say, it's okay, it's okay. I know you're afraid, but I've got the solution. I'm going to fix all the problems. So just make sure to vote for me. Everything's going to be good. Controlling them with emotions. And even though now he's elected, he's on the news every day. That's not by accident. The news doesn't really care what he's doing. He's calling the news and saying, hey, this is what we're going to broadcast today. He wants to keep the entire country emotional. The entire government wants to keep the entire country emotional because that's how they control us. That's how they get us to support one thing and not support something else. By using our emotions. They know we're emotionally attached to one specific thing. So this is very important because as you're learning liberty, what you're going to find is when you go and you talk to somebody who doesn't like liberty because they don't know about it yet, and you try to teach them about it, you're going to find that they're not really listening. Because at the end of the day, they're still questioning, okay, but less government, what's in it for me? It's their emotion. What's in it for me? Right now, government, they come around and give me something every once in a while. So if there's less government, they're going to give me less stuff. Why should I support this system that you're thinking about? So this is a very important thing. And this is a big part of my campaign is figuring that out. Because even in the United States, the libertarians like to focus on these deep thought, philosophical, rational, logical arguments. But the reality is that doesn't get very far with most people. So this is why a lot of my campaign is trying to figure out what are these problems and these fears that people are already facing. Fears that they have because of the Trump campaign. He was saying, he's been president for over 2 years now, and he was saying, all these Mexicans are going to come and they're going to take your jobs and we can just secure the border and all this other stuff. The government was just shut down for a whole month, and that didn't even happen. So he's saying all these things were going to happen. He's done nothing so far to stop that, and yet the problem never came around. So was he lying? Was he just trying to create fear to control people? But what's interesting is when you understand how people think, what human nature is, you can see what they're afraid of, and you can talk to them about those fears. So if people are afraid of something because that's what the current government is promoting, or if maybe they're not afraid of something, they're excited for something, the government's going to give them something. You have to figure out what that is and not just tell them that it's bad. Don't just fight with them, because if you just start a fight with them and say that's wrong, you're thinking wrong, then anything you say after that, they're not going to listen to you. They've already established that you're the enemy, and for some reason you're trying to convince them to give up free stuff that they're getting. So you can't fight with people. You have to understand how they're thinking and why they're thinking. And so this is a very difficult problem because we're becoming very rational, logical thinkers. And now I'm telling you, you have to go back and speak to emotional thinkers. It's very difficult to do because it's not the same language. So that's going to be an interesting process for you. But I want to thank all you for coming out here and for participating in this program. And I've heard some really amazing things from everybody, from all your projects and what you said about government and how you see the future. I think it's all really amazing. So thank everyone for coming out, and thank everyone for putting the event together. And I think that's all I got. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Berman. You are saying that we should be assertive when we are demanding what belongs to us from the government. Why is the government a threat to us when we demand our freedom? Why is the government always afraid when we demand our freedom?
Right. Why is government always offering when you demand freedom? Well, think about when you negotiate anything. You go to buy something and they say, here's the price, and you say, well, I want to pay you less. and they say, well, okay, I'll give you a little bit less. You're negotiating, right? You're trying to figure out what exactly is the price that we're going to put on this exchange. Well, the government, what's the objective in negotiating? It's always to give the least and get the most, right? So if I'm the government and I'm negotiating with you, and you're telling me you want freedom, and I say, well, I can't give you freedom, that's too much. If I give you freedom, I'm not going to have any money or power. How about I just give you some money instead? How about I just give you something, I'll find something small that I can afford to give you that doesn't hurt me. So this is why they give you things instead of freedom. It's less expensive for them.
Replying to his question, that why does the government feel threatened every time we demand for rights from them? I related it to maybe you are here and you want food for supper, and for your food you want chicken. So if you say to this chicken that you want it for food, that you want food from me, then definitely it is threatened. It has to run. It has to see you as an enemy. But it is now up to you to run after it, up when you grab it, slaughter it, eat your chicken.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point, because what is government? It's a concentration of power. And if you ask for freedom, what are you really doing? You're taking their power away. So if government is the chicken, you're telling them, hey, the chicken is not going to be around if I get my freedom. And they feel threatened by that.
I think there's another question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.